Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Hockey Writers Fantasy Forecheck podcast. As always, I am your host, Jacob Strozyk, and I have my co-host.
And I'm Jacob Billington.
And today, we're going to go through the left wingers on the list and up on the docket. A lot of players to go through. So we're not going to have time to get through every single one of them. We're going to talk about some highlighted players. Before we go into those choices, as always, I would like to torment my co-host and ask him about young players, kind of like last week. What are some young left wingers that you think are going to have that breakout spot this year, fantasy wise, that you should really be looking at in the deep portions of your draft?
Yeah, I think a big one is Matt Boldy. He's listed as left winger on, I think, all of the fantasy sites, but I know that sometimes
Yep.
he does play the right side as well, but mostly
Mm-hmm.
listed as left wing. He's going to have a huge season in Minnesota. They're going to rely on him. Obviously, their cap is getting tight. They're relying on these younger guys coming up, and he's going to be given a great opportunity. And I think that he can hover around that 70-point mark if he has a good full season.
I love Boldy as a player. I tried trading for him, I think, two separate times in my other league. And at one point, I even had an offer that I was considering taking where I almost moved Jack Eichel for him and something else. And I was like, he's going to be so good down the road. And I feel like I should make this, but ultimately didn't end up pulling the trigger on that. We'll see if I end up regretting every decision I've made up to that point. But I love Boldy. I really, really think he's a not even a sneaky pick. He was just flat out good last year, especially in that breakout spot. So I think he'll get the right amount of attention. I don't know if he's going to fall to deep portions of the draft this year. Probably maybe upper middle rounds, even at this point, considering where he sits on that Minnesota depth chart. So I like him. He's my top pick too, as far as young left wingers. I have a few others that I could dip into, but then I'm just going to sound like a homer, and we're not going to do that for the next 20 minutes. All right, let's talk about the high end. There are massive names in this spot. I have a bunch here, but for me, number one left wing, just overall for fantasy, it's got to be Brady Tkachuk. He fits all of the right fantasy categories. He scores, he hits, he blocks, he does every possible thing a forward can do. And in a position that isn't typically seen as a physical position, he's still doing it. So it adds that much more value as far as a fantasy perspective goes. What do you think?
I love it, especially as an Ottawa guy. I absolutely love it. I was really expecting you to say Matthew Tkachuk first of all,
No.
um, and I love it. Brady's the first left winger I take in drafts, and might that be biased? Maybe a little bit, but he is one of the most valuable players you can get. Obviously, he's not going to be in contention for the Art Ross every year, but in terms of fantasy value, like you can't get any better than that.
Like even penalty minutes, he gets a good amount of penalty minutes to add on to it. He's just that pure power forward, piss you off type of player, and
Yeah.
he's perfect for fantasy. So I think he's my number one pick as far as left wingers go. If I were to be, kind of formulating that team, and that is not to say anything negative about these next handful of players because they're all incredible.
Yeah.
Give me one off your list, even though I probably took the number one on yours.
He definitely took number one on my list, but I'll go with his brother. And for all the same reasons, he has a higher offensive output. He's probably going to score 105 to 110, maybe even 115 points this year. And he does get those hits and the blocks and the all those things, but just not quite at the same level as Brady does. But Matthew Tkachuk is like you cannot go wrong taking him, and I expect that he will be the first left winger off of almost every draft. But like you said, I do think that I would take Brady Tkachuk first.
Another one I want to dip into, pure skill wise, made a huge name for himself with his scoring prowess. Dallas, Jason Robertson. I think he's got all the right tools, all the right talents. I think he's got one of the best chemistry with his line mates type thing going. So that always adds to value when it comes to fantasy because you can get different players that have like pairings. So if you get Robertson plus Hints once you get to your center spot, that's kind of that dynamic duo that can really run your fantasy points up as far as your standings go. So I think Robertson is I'd say top 10 draft pick based off of that. As far as potential goes, you can maybe even drop him to top 15, depending on how you value some of these other players. But if you're grabbing Robertson in your top 10, if he falls anywhere out of that, just grab him at 11, 12, or 13 if you can, because he's got scoring, he's got playmaking, and on a Dallas team that's just offensively charged and very, very well put together, I think you're going to get a lot of success out of him.
Yeah, and I think that it's not going to be any surprise if he puts up 45, 50 goals and 100 points this year. Like, he's so consistent and somehow still flies under the radar. Like, I wouldn't call him underrated. Everybody knows how good he is. But when you're talking about these like super high tier left wingers and super high tier forwards, nobody talks about him the way that they should. It's like when somebody finally brings him up, they're like, oh yeah, he's a superstar, whatever. But he's not usually one of those first guys you bring up. And I'm glad that you brought him up this early in the conversation because he really deserves that.
Yeah, I think he gets a little overshadowed at times is probably the word. Maybe not underrated type thing, but I think just overshadowed because of how much talent there is at the left wing position in the NHL. So he might not be constantly in a conversation, but he deserves to be because of what he does. Yeah. Give me another one of yours.
I'm going to go with Kaprizov in Minnesota.
Okay.
Obviously, super highly touted. Everybody talks about him. I do think that he might be a little bit overrated, but he still is very fitting in this conversation. People talk about him like he's in contention with Leon Draisaitl, Connor McDavid as the best players in the league sometimes. But he is like in that definitely top 5 left winger position. He's probably going to score another 40 goals, probably hit the 90-point mark. Fantastic. Like there's nothing wrong with his game at all. And it's just if he can stay consistent this year, then he's definitely worth the top 15, 20 draft pick.
I think he was hurt for a little bit last year too, if I remember correctly. And that's why Boldy kind of had that spot up on that top position. So I think one of the reasons people might think that Kaprizov is slightly overrated is just because of how much better he is comparative to the rest of that Minnesota forward group as far as offensive talent goes. Because it's not like they're lacking a lot of offensive talent. They have it. It's just they've never had, or not never, it's that they haven't had that like superstar caliber forward. So he kind of gets overhyped from that because people are just excited about what he does. But that shouldn't stray you away from picking him up at any point in the top portions of your draft. Top 20 for sure, top maybe 17 if we're getting really specific.
Yeah, and like I said, like I say overrated, but he's still fantastic. Like when I say overrated, people talk about him like he's a top 7 pick in the fantasy draft. Not quite that highly touted, but like you said, that top 17 to 20, anywhere in there.
Let me see. Oh, one that I really like towards the high end. I know he probably fell off just a little bit as far as people's rankings just because of last year, is Artemi Panarin. I love his game. I always loved having him on my fantasy teams because he's got that good roundedness of goal scoring plus playmaking. He's kind of primarily a playmaker at this point, but he still does all of those right things as far as scoring goes, that he's consistent throughout the year. He's going to get you that 2-assist game, and then he's going to randomly throw up a goal in an assist game. It's just constantly going throughout the year. And he's been point a game or better for a while now. So it's nothing that you would be disappointed in. I don't think he's a top 10, maybe not even top 20, but I think he'd be top 25 as far as picking your forward group. And you're not going to be disappointed with anything he does for your team, especially if you can get him paired with Zibanejad or anybody else that he could be playing with if he gets shuffled up and down those top 2 lines.
Yeah, he's good for 90 points. He's relatively consistent too. Like he's always going to be right around that 90-point mark. I think he hit 200 shots last year too, which is really good. And usually right around that 25, 30 goals. Like you said, he's more of a playmaker, but he does bring a lot of valuable things. He's going to get you power play points. He's not going to get you too many hits or blocks or anything, but he is going to be that offensive machine that every team needs.
Yeah, I always just like having him because of that consistency. Consistency is king when I build my fantasy teams, just for the sake of, I don't like using my high picks on streaky players because that just leaves way too much to chance.
Yeah.
All right. Give me another one of yours.
I'm going to go with
Ovechkin.
I'm going to go with Ovechkin. It's every year you have to say he's going to score 40 plus goals. I was just thinking about Ovechkin today, actually, and he's 72 goals away from the record. He's not slowing down. He scored 42 goals last year, I believe, and or maybe 39. I don't know, somewhere right around the 40 goal mark.
No, he had 40.
Yeah.
Definitely had 40.
I think he's going to be good for 40 again. Obviously, he's going to be 38 before the season starts. He's definitely getting older, but he hasn't really slowed down any. He plays a really physical game. He's going to get you hits, but he doesn't do a ton of skating on the ice. We all know that he stands at the top of the circle waiting for the one-timer. So how much can you really slow down if you're just standing there and shooting? Like, his shot's not going to get any worse. So I do think that his goal scoring ability is just going to stay relatively the same. And he's still going to be good for 40 goals for at least another year.
I think where he provides the most value is not just the goal scoring, but the power play scoring.
Yeah.
Just because of it, the Washington Capitals power play always functions off of, just assume Ovechkin is on that side on both units. He just, because you're right, he doesn't really need to move, because he just stands in a spot, waits for his opportunity, and he buries it as soon as he gets it. So goal scoring always, but power play scoring specifically. He had 25 power play points last year. 14 of those were goals. He had 42 goals, and he was still over a point a game overall. So you're not going to go wrong picking Ovechkin, despite the fact that he's in his upper 30s. He's 37. So no, he's not getting any younger, but he's not really getting any worse from what he's been doing over the past couple of years. So fantasy-wise, I'd say a top 25 pick. I don't think he's in that upper echelon of like top 15 anymore, just because of, the decline of the Capitals in general, plus his age, obviously. But I always love Ovechkin.
He's still good for 250 shots and 150 hits. Like, those are still really good assets to have on your fantasy team as well. And so on top of the obvious goals and power play points that he's going to get, he does a lot more than that too.
Yeah, looking at his shot totals, his career high in shots was in 2008, 2009, when he had 528 shots.
That is ridiculous.
Last season, he had 294. Like, that's just insane. It looks like he averages about 350 shots a year, and that's with the high-end ones, and even with the low-end ones on the lockout years and stuff like that, where he still had 200 or 200 plus. Yep. So if you have a shots stat any point in your league, Ovechkin's pick for you, because the dude shoots. Last one for me. I want to go for Kyle Connor. I know Winnipeg is a little bit tumultuous at this point, but Connor for me has always been just a pure, consistent scoring player. And I've tried to get him in so many different leagues, and nobody ever wants to move him. And it disappoints me that I can't fleece anybody for him, because I feel like I know what he's worth, and apparently a lot of other people know what he's worth. But that's what he is. He's a goal scorer. He's a point scorer, and he's going to continue to do that for a long time. So grabbing him in that top 25, if he drops below 25, pick him at 26, because he really has just so much offensive talent, and he's going to continue to be a leading source of scoring for the Jets as long as he remains there.
Yeah, and he's going to be the number one option. Him and Mark Scheifele, they're going to be the number 1 and 2 offensive options on that team, especially with Wheeler gone. He's been the
and Dubois
workhorse for them for a while. Dubois gone. They got a lot of younger guys coming up the lineup. Obviously, they still have Nikolai Ehlers, who we'll probably talk about in a little bit. But Kyle Connor is definitely like 40 goals, 40 assists. You can almost bank on that. And
Yeah,
any better is just like
it's
awesome.
gravy.
Yeah. So he's really consistent too, like you said. So there's a lot of great things to really appreciate about his game and definitely worth picking up.
I just like him as a player. He's just one of my favorite players to watch too in the league. So it's that personal connection that makes you want to grab him in
Yeah.
fantasy. At least
Well, and with
that's for me.
his hair hanging out the back, and
That's
he's always
true.
got style. Yeah.
That's true. That never hurts. You got any more on your top end, or we good to go to the next one?
I don't think not in this tier of players that we're talking about. But in the next tier, there's so many left wingers that are
Oh
elite.
yeah. All right. So before we go into that, real quick, here is a message from the Hockey Writers.
Interested in writing for the Hockey Writers? If you have experience writing about hockey, are passionate about the sport, and are looking to take your writing to the next level, the Hockey Writers could be the place for you. Here at THW, you will have the opportunity to hone your craft at one of the world's largest and most respected hockey publishers. You will have control over what you write, be able to seek out media credentials, and be supported by a large network of writers and editors. Plus, you'll get paid for doing it. If you're interested and want to know more about team openings and requirements, please visit the Write for THW page on the Hockey Writers website. A link to that page is also listed in the description.
Okay, we are back. Next category, kind of same as last week, where we're going to do some sneaky good picks, players that might fly a little bit under the radar, or ones that had really good years last year that people still might be like, they're not going to do that again. But I think that they might. Top of my list would be Ryan Nugent-Hopkins. I know he's listed at center left wing, but he played a lot of left wing last year, so I'm going to classify him there as far as our rankings go and all of that. So I had Nugent-Hopkins in both of my leagues last year, and he was just absolutely dynamite. And I mean dynamite, playing just so many minutes in so many scenarios, getting so many different kinds of points, a lot of scoring points this year, which was a fantastic boost. And I think he can do it again. I think he's finally hit that comfortability and that spot on the roster where he can just be himself, and he realizes, I don't have to be the guy. So now he's comfortable, he's ready to roll, and I think he's poised for another, I'd say 80 plus point season. Not sure if he'll hit 100 again. I think that might be a bit of a stretch, but I'd say 80 plus, and I think that's well worth picking up in your, top 50, 60 players.
Yeah, and the Oilers' top six is just getting even more well-rounded. They have Evander Kane, obviously McDavid and Draisaitl, but they added Connor Brown in there too. So Nugent-Hopkins is bound to play with somebody that is also capable of putting up the points. Before it was kind of, they would put a top-heavy line out, and then Nugent-Hopkins kind of had that second or third line in just more of a defensive role. But obviously he was trusted to put up some offense last year, and he might have had one of the quietest 100-point seasons in NHL history. Like, nobody was talking about him all year until he hit it, and everybody's like, oh, he's just from playing with McDavid and whatever. But he really did take a step last year on his own. And like you said, can definitely put up that like point a game mark again.
Yeah, I think it was just it was interesting to see, because you were right. People were just like, oh, he scored 100 points. Where did that come from? I mean, he had just great overall stats. It was 82 games played, 104 points. It was just under 40 goals. He had 37. Power play points, he had 53, which is just astronomical. But then again, so was that Oilers power play. So power play points, you're going to be banking on Nugent-Hopkins for. But a really interesting stat is he had 37 goals, but he only had 201 shots. So it's not like he was shooting a whole bunch. It's just an average amount, I would say, for somebody in that position. He was just getting good quality shots off, and I think that made a difference for him. So I think he's supremely underrated considering what he could do. Give me one from your list.
I'm going to go with the Oilers, and I kept his name off the list. I'll go with Zach Hyman. Yeah. Playing alongside Connor McDavid it fits so well for him. He's just done such a good job of filling in that role of, I'll go get the puck, but I'll also make a good pass to you, so you're always going to get it, and then let McDavid or Draisaitl or whoever else finish the rest of the play. Obviously, he scored a ton of points last year, but I really think that he's going to be in a position to duplicate that again. So he's my pick for kind of a sneaky pick that people are still stuck in the 45-point Hyman from Toronto, and he's really emerged as a fantastic player who can score 70 to 90 points depending on really how good of a season he has.
Yeah, we dipped into Hyman a bit last week. I liked our discussion that we had on him. I think it's just a good overall option for anywhere because he does play both sides. So you can pick him for either one, which is great for the versatility, especially if you have leagues that kind of they're structured where you have to put the player in the specific position of right wing, left wing, center. It gives him that additional mobility up and down that type of a lineup. So I think that adds a little bit of extra value for those types of leagues, considering the scoring and he plays both sides of the wing. So it's important to always note those types of things when you're drafting players. Sometimes that player that plays just pure center or just pure wing might not be worth nearly as much as somebody who can play as a dual threat role. So when you pick your players, always pay attention to those things for the sake of balancing your lineup and having mobility between those types of players. So I think he's a great example of somebody who can play that kind of switch role in the top end. So I love Hyman, and I really hope people don't pay attention to him so I can pick him up myself. Top left winger for me that kind of flew under the radar, but also didn't at the same time. Clayton Keller.
Yep.
He's on Arizona, so people are just going to kind of push that and slide it under the rug a little bit. But he just had a killer year, and he was just an absolute dynamo and was the primary reason behind most of the Coyotes offense. He was almost single-handedly being like, no, we're not tanking for Bedard. We're going to win some games, and because I said so. So if at any point you have the opportunity to pick Keller, again, it's in that top maybe 50, 60, even 65 players of a draft. You're not going to be disappointed because he's going to continue scoring. He's going to continue putting up the points. He's more a playmaker than he is a goal scorer, but don't discount his goal scoring ability because he still puts up a good amount of shots and he will put up a good amount of goals. I love Keller, and is another person that I really hope people pay attention to so I can get him myself in a few of my leagues.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Keller, and I'm a big fan of the Coyotes going into this year too. Like they have a lot of underrated pieces. They added some good pieces this offseason. Keller's going to have even better line mates to play with. He's probably going to get the opportunity to play with Logan Cooley or Dylan Gunther at some point this year. So he might even just have a better year. And he put up a point a game.
Both?
Like it's insane. So I completely agree. Huge fan of Keller, and I hope I get the opportunity to take him at the right time. But yeah,
I just think he's fun to watch on top of all of that. I have a few more from this list, but give me one of yours.
Yeah, I'm going to go with somebody who went from underrated to overrated and overpaid to underrated again. And I'm going to go with Jeff Skinner. I don't know what happened. He obviously, when Don Granato came into Buffalo, things just switched for him. And he had a much better season, especially last year. He put up, 82 points?
82 points.
Yeah. So he's going to be good he's getting into that age that any year now he's going to kind of take a little bit of a step back and whatever. But I do think that 35 goals, 70 points is what you could expect. And he will probably still build on that, especially with Buffalo getting better. I'm definitely a huge fan of just the opportunity that Skinner has right now because he's the number one left wing on that team right now, and they're still taking those steps forward. And he's probably gonna light the lamp a lot this year.
Yeah, as far as what happened to Jeff Skinner, the answer is Ralph Kruger wasn't kicked out fast enough. That's what happened to Jeff Skinner, and thankfully he wasn't completely broken, and he still was like, no, I'm awesome, and I can score a bunch of goals. And as soon as Granato was like, yeah, I agree, you can score some goals, go and do it, he started doing it again. So I love Jeff as a player. I love Jeff as a fantasy option for the sake of he shoots. He's more a shooter than he is a playmaker more than anything. He has It's a pretty even split for his career, but in general, most of his seasons, he has more goals than he does assists. This year was an exception where he had more assists than he did goals. So his playmaking kind of became a little bit more valuable as far as his options go. But he is a pure left winger and he is a goal scorer at heart. So you're not going to go wrong. I'm not sure if he's a, top 50, 60, but I think he'd be closer to 60, 70 as far as the number of players go. So maybe somewhere in your 8th, maybe 7th round, you'd be picking up somebody like that, depending on how deep your drafts go.
Yeah.
But I see no issues with picking Skinner in those middle portions to really balance out your top 6 for your fantasy lineup. One for me, got himself a nice big contract with the Tampa Bay Lightning, and I think he's really come into his own. Brandon Hagel. He is a dual threat center and left wing, but he primarily played wing this year. So he's probably going to be listed as a pure left wing for a good portion of the year, which is completely fine. But I think being on Tampa Bay and playing in that top 6 and being in a consistent scoring role like he should be, I think he's going to be able to replicate what he did last year. I think he can put up another 30 goals, and I think he's going to be undervalued considering how top heavy the Lightning are with their forward group. So he still might not get the amount of attention that he's probably deserves if he were, not on a stacked team. So pay attention to where he's positioned in your fantasy rankings because he might be lower than you would expect. So you might need to go and look for him if you're going to pick him a little bit higher. And I think he deserves to be picked a little bit higher so you can get that extra asset comparative to some of these other, mid-tier wingers.
Yeah, I agree. He does a lot of the right things. He's going to get you 50 to 75 blocks and hits too. Takes a good amount of shots. I think he was just over 150 last year. He does all those small things that get you all these little points in your fantasy leagues. But also 64 points, I believe he had last year, maybe 65. And he's just going to keep building on that. He's young. Obviously, Tampa Bay really liked him. They sent over a buttload of assets for him to Chicago, but like they gave him a big contract. He's earned it, and he's probably going to push the 75, 82 point mark. Especially with opportunity, because Tampa Bay has a lot of really skilled players, including him. But he's not just a passenger on that team, but he's probably going to get the opportunity to play with some of Braden Point, Steven Stamkos, Nikita Kucherov. Even if it's just on the power play, he's getting a ton of ice time with them.
Yeah, last year he had 30 goals, 64 points. He was a plus 23. And he had 178 shots. So, like you said, he was just over that 150 marker. Shooting percentage, 16.85, so almost 17%, which is pretty on par with what his career is, which is 16.1. That will go down. Shooting at that rate is pretty much not sustainable. Yeah. But, even if he does drop down to that, 12, 13% mark, he'll still put up 26 to maybe 32 goals. And they'll be pushing that, 70-point marker playing on Tampa Bay. So I think it's got a lot of value there. Anybody else you want to jump in on for that category?
I'll say what my last sneaky pick is going to be Andrei Kuzmenko. Talked about him last week, had to cut that out because I had his position wrong. But it's all good. I love Kuzmenko, especially in as being an Ottawa guy. I like Kuzmenko. Because I was really hoping that they would sign him when he was coming over from Russia. Vancouver won those sweepstakes, and they're very lucky to have him. He scored 39 goals last year and almost hit a point a game. I think he was at 74 points is what he finished with, if I'm not mistaken. Just came in with such ease, scored a ton of goals. It fits anywhere in the lineup, but Vancouver's so hard because I don't know what to expect from them this year. They have all the pieces that they need to be super successful, but they just can't put it all together. And I really hope that under Rick Tocchet that they can do that, because I really like a lot of the players that Vancouver has, and Kuzmenko could be one of the leaders on that team in terms of the offensive output. So I think that he's definitely going to build off last year, maybe score 45 points, hit the 80, 82 point mark, and just be a super solid winger to have on your team.
I think he might even have the potential to be better than just a super solid winger, because I'm looking at his stats. You're right, 39 goals. He had 74 points in 81 games, so that's awesome. 14 power play goals, a total of 19 power play points, so he skews towards the goal scoring. But here's one that's going to blow your mind. How many shots do you think he had?
I know he had
39 goals.
39 goals. I know he had a really high shooting percentage. 196.
He had 143 shots. He was shooting at 27.27%.
Holy crap. See, and so when
almost 30%.
Obviously that is unsustainable, but is his shot output going to go up, or is his goal scoring going to go down? Like, is he going to stay at that 150 shot mark, or is he going to double it, go to 300 shots and keep 45, 50 goals? So I wonder how that's going to play out. That'll be interesting, because obviously he wasn't eligible for the Calder last year, but he was a rookie. Yep. It was his first year in the NHL. So we don't know any kind of track record on Kuzmenko.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to follow. Yeah, but it's going to be interesting to follow him just based off of that stat, because I think that's very interesting that he managed to just drop 39 goals on less than 150 shots. So you're right. Almost 30% shooting percentage. No way in this world or the next he's maintaining that. But if he jumps up to maybe 200 to 250 shots, maybe he's pushing that 45, 50 goal mark in Vancouver, especially playing alongside Pettersson or even Miller, who's another very great center option. So I think he's a good little dark horse character here.
Yeah, and he has the advantage of being a right shot, which is why I thought he was a right winger last week. But he's a right shot winger, and he comes down the left side, and he's got a great shooting lane, and he's really good at opening up a lane anyway. And also, not to underestimate his passing abilities too. I've watched a lot of Vancouver. I've watched him a lot. I don't know. I really like Kuzmenko. I liked him before he was signed and everything. But watching him just make plays, he just did all the right things. So he could take a huge step this season.
So what do you think? Top 50? Higher? Lower?
Yeah, about the top 50.
Okay.
And it all depends on like who you already have drafted. If you already have two superstar left wingers, then maybe not until like top 65 picks if he's still there. But yeah, top 50 as a blanket.
Do you think he does better if he plays with Pettersson or Miller?
I'm gonna go with Miller for sure, just because Miller has that. Well, it's tough because Pettersson has had such a fantastic year last year. They both have insane playmaking abilities and can get the puck to him. So now that I think about it, even just for a second, I'm either or. Miller is that more pure offensive guy that I think Kuzmenko could benefit from playing with. But Pettersson is also just as talented and does the two-way game. So I don't know. It's tough.
I like it. We might be overhyping him a little bit, but it's exciting to talk about that type of a player when they're putting up stupid good numbers like that. So
no, he is scoring 70
pay
goals
attention to it.
Draft him first.
Yeah, draft first overall, 75 goals, shooting at 35% with what would that be, like 200 shots? That's it. That'd be ridiculous. All right. Drop down to the next category. I got these as hit or miss characters for a number of reasons, but I have a few. Top of my list, Filip Forsberg.
Yeah.
He's either on your IR doing absolutely nothing, or he's on the ice putting up 3 points a game, and then he just disappears out of nowhere. So it's so random and it's so streaky. I've wanted to use him in different years. Sometimes he's been an absolute spitfire for me, and then other years he's been the bane of my existence. So he's a hit or miss personally for me, but I think he has all the right offensive talent to be a high-end winger if he stays healthy.
Yeah, I completely agree. And he signed a big contract. He's going to be one of the top guys for offense on that team. And again, like you said, he's just either injured or lighting the lamp. And it's so hard to predict injuries because he could come back, play an 82-game season, put up 40 goals, 90 points. No one's like, that's not surprising to anybody if he can stay healthy.
If is the key word when it comes to Forsberg for me. And I want him. I want to have him on my team consistently, and I want him to be producing, but I don't have the faith that he can stay healthy yet. Keyword is yet. I got a bunch more for this. Give me one of yours.
I'm going to go with Johnny Gadreau. He either 110 points or 70 points, and 70 points is still a great year. So a miss isn't that bad by Gadreau, but it's depending on what you're expecting and where you're drafting him. So if you're going to want to draft him 2 years ago, it would have made sense to draft him top 20. But this year, if you're going to draft him even in the top 30, then you're taking a big risk. It all comes down to how is Columbus going to respond to last year. They have Adam Fantilli now. They have a new coach. They have a lot of changes that keep happening. They added Damon Severson as well. But it's just, how's Johnny Gaudreau going to mesh? And that goes along with Patrick Laine, who we talked about last week, who both of them seem to be a bit hit or miss. So it'll be really interesting to see what kind of year he has.
My issue with Gaudreau isn't necessarily with his point scoring, because he's always been a point scorer.
Yeah.
But that's kind of at the same time, the issue is he only is a point scorer when it comes to fantasy. He doesn't get blocks. He doesn't get hits. He's not really one for any defensive metrics. He's not a center, so he doesn't get face-off wins. He doesn't get a ton of shots. He gets a good amount of shots, but you're only really going to get assists and a bunch of goals out of him. So I don't like him as a top-end player for me, and I agree with that hit or miss where he's either, putting up 100 points or 74 points. Nothing wrong with 74 points, but when 50 of those are assists and you're getting them every other game, it's a little bit tough sometimes to deal with somebody like him. So he's a bit tantalizing, if you ask me. Another one on my list. Oh, go ahead. No, go.
If you're in a league that tracks plus minus, it's also not very good at all. Obviously, in Calgary, it was phenomenal on that line. And that might be a factor of playing in Columbus as well. But I think he was like a minus 29 last year, or maybe even lower. Let's
check that. Now I gotta know.
That's going to take a big hit on your team. So
I think it's
but personally, I think that Columbus is going to take a step forward this year. I think they have a lot of the pieces they need, especially with Forecheck coming in on the back end. They have, like I said, Fantilli, and then they have Laine and Gadreau. They have a lot of good pieces.
He was minus 33 last year.
Yeah.
So you were close.
Yeah.
Minus 33 after the previous season when he had 115 points. He was a plus 64 that year.
Yeah.
But that was back in Calgary. So his first year in Columbus, 74 points, minus 33, but they were also not very good. So, that's not horrible, but it's not good either.
Yeah.
All right. Next one on my list. We kind of talked about it, or we mentioned him a little bit earlier. Nikolai Ehlers. Yeah. He's a little bit back and forth for me because there's some years where he's really good, and then there's other years where he's just not. Last year, he was kind of meh. So it kind of depends. Where is his spot in Winnipeg? Is he going to be a third line player? Is he going to be a top six player? Where is he really going to fill out his role? And if he does, he's kind of that split offensive player. He scores goals and he gets assists. So he's going to get you both sides of your points. Not super physical, decent defensively, but he really is just a premier hit or miss, because he's just going to be good or he's going to be average. And how much patience do you really have for a player like that to kind of pick up or drop and decide, do I want somebody who's hot or do I want somebody who's just going to be okay this year? And he kind of fits in that, mid-tier for me.
Yeah, and obviously it all depends on how good of a season that Winnipeg has as well. And it just, if their offense is rolling or not. And Ehlers, it's so hard to predict what kind of year he's going to have, because anywhere from like 62 to 91 points, neither end would surprise me. And it's just, I love the player. He's one of my favorite players in the league, but he's just so unpredictable when it comes to how's he going to do this year.
It's not even like he's streaky during the season. He's just a streaky season player. So it's tough to predict that. Give me another one of yours.
I'm going to go with Jared McCann. And as much as I love Jared McCann, and I love Seattle, I love the team Seattle built. I like that their kind of philosophy is Just every single player is going to score 20 goals for us instead of having all these superstars and high end players and whatnot. But somebody's got to do that every year. Last year it was McCann. Is he going to be that guy again? I don't know, because like they just have so many guys capable of doing it, but they don't play a system that really supports one guy doing that. So he put up a career high of 40 goals and 70 points last year. Before that, I think the season before that, he had like 50 points and 24 goals or something. So it just depends on like what kind of McCann are you going to get? Are you going to get the one that leads the team and is the guy? Who knows? It's hard with Seattle and under Dave Hackstall because we've only seen a couple of years of them. We don't really know like the trends that this team takes and whatnot. But Jared McCann, he does have the talent to be a 40 goal scorer. It wasn't just a one-off. 30 goals is completely fair to expect from him each year. But it just kind of depends on who's going to be leading the way on that team. And especially with some young guys like Matty Beniers and Shane Wright, who's probably going to play. And plus they added some more winger depth and like signing Kyler Yamamoto. That's not necessarily, he's not going to take Jared McCann's job, but it just adds more winger depth to what they already have and takes a little bit less time from McCann. So,
yeah, I like McCann. I think he could even be under the category of sneaky pick, just for the sake of he did have a quiet 40 goal season because even though he was leading, Seattle in goals. Last year he was good. He had 50 points, the year before he had 50 points, and then last year he had the 70 points in 79 games. He was shooting well, 210 shots. He was just under 20% for his shooting, so that is going to go down. I think the 35 goal mark is probably a good, thing to expect from him as far as consistency goes. But I think he's just a good fantasy player because he does have some physicality to him as well. He does get a decent amount of hits. So that peripheral coverage from somebody like McCann, especially playing on Seattle, where, you're right. It's kind of like a hive mind type thing that they use for their offense. It's just everybody contributes. There's not just one guy who's going to do everything for you. So McCann kind of stepping up and being one of the better guys in that scenario. I think using, your 9th, 10th round pick on somebody like him, you're not going to be wasting it at all.
right.
Just because he's got all the right tools and he's going to get you coverage across the board. So I love McCann. I had him. Actually, I think I had him in both my leagues last year as well. And he just kept going because people just kept picking him up and dropping him. And he just ended up on the waiver wire. And by some point I was just like, you know what? I'm keeping him. He just keeps putting up goals. I'm going to keep him. And he was awesome. So I would do it again this year. 100%.
Yeah.
Big hit or miss for me, just based off of streakiness and the type of player that he is. Dominic Kubalik. Yeah. I think his super hot start last year kind of put him a little bit more on the radar, but he really fizzled out, and then he had a couple of random hot streaks in the middle of it. I don't think he's a bad player. I think he has all of the right tools to be a really good goal scorer, but he just needs that consistency more than anything else. It's not a skill issue. It's not an opportunity issue. It's a consistency issue with him. And I think he is going to have a good opportunity to do something. But the question is, can he? Do you think he can?
It's going to be really tough. On Ottawa's third line, he's going to be playing with Shane Pinto, and the other spot is going to be up for grabs, most likely. There's nobody locked in there quite yet. If he can score 20 goals, that'll be great, and that's kind of what's expected from him. He's a 20-goal guy. He scored 30 in his rookie season, and since then he's just 20-goal guy. He's good for it. But over the course of a season, like you said, he's super streaky. So if you're going to keep him the entire season, he's fine. But if you're going to be picking him up and dropping him and whatnot, if you're an unlucky person, I would just stay away from him because he will go on that 9-game goalless drought, and then you drop him, and then somebody else picks him up and he scores 7 in the next 8 games. Like he's such a streaky player that you can't really rely on him in fantasy. Again, if you're looking at the whole season, he's worth taking late in the draft. But if you're somebody that struggles with, if a player's on a drought, then you're just gonna drop them. You're gonna drop him pretty quick.
But he's a great depth option. He's not a top end option. He's a good depth scoring player for that bottom tier. Rotate him into your lineup if he's hot type player to me. So he'd be more of a like 15th, 16th, 17th round pick type, option for me. I got one more on mine. Give me one more from yours.
I got one more too, and I don't know if he really fits here, but I'm gonna go with Lucas Raymond. He had a fantastic rookie season, took a bit of a step back last year, and I think he only scored 17 goals last year. He's certainly a 30 goal, 70-point player. It's just kind of like the consistency thing we talked about. He just needs to be able to put it all together, have a good year, and he's got a lot of good players now. He's probably going to be playing with Alex DeBrincat and Dylan Larkin for the whole season, and that's a really good line. DeBrincat has something to prove now. He struggled in Ottawa last year, and Lucas Raymond is just like, that's probably one of the best lines that Detroit's had since the mid 2010s at least. So
yeah, I like Raymond. It's like you said, he had a really good rookie year. I got his stats pulled up. He had 23 goals, 57 assists his rookie year, but he was a minus 32. Last year, 74 games played, 17 goals, 45 points, but he was a minus 17. His power play points were about the same both years, 18 his rookie, 19 his second year. He shot a lot less comparatively to his rookie year. He was down from 184 to 134. Shooting percentage was about the same, but it was the total shots that went down, and I think that affected his goal scoring. But I agree. I think he's going to have a bit more of an up year this year, considering how Detroit's kind of rolling out their offense. And with the additions that they made, I think he's going to benefit from that. I'm not sure if he's a top end pick. He'd be more of a 13th, 14th rounder, as far as I'm concerned, to kind of again round out maybe your bottom six of your lineup card. So I wouldn't have any issues picking him up. I think he's not even that streaky. He's just been okay. It's not that he's ever been like amazing. He's just been okay. So this might be the breakout year for him, and I think he'll be a fun one to watch on a very good and underratedly dangerous Detroit team. All right, so I have my last one here, and he's definitely one of my biggest candidates, Taylor Hall.
Yeah.
It really comes down to one question. Is he going to play with Bedard? Probably. And does he mesh well with that Chicago offense, or is he going to try and be the guy and carry it and take attention away from Bedard? How does he play it, and how does he end up contributing to the offense? Because he's never been a physical guy. He's not going to get a bunch of hits, but he's always been a point guy. And playing with Bedard, it could be absolute lightning in a bottle, or it could be absolutely nothing like it was when he played in Buffalo. We will see.
Yeah.
I'm skeptic on how I think it'll play out, but you might have a different opinion.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with everything you said. And I'm trying to remember the name of the podcast to kind of shout them out, but somebody online said that the difference between Bedard and McDavid is that you have to adapt your game to be able to play with McDavid. He's just that fast. He's that good that you have to kind of change your game to play with him. You don't have to do that with Bedard. Now, Bedard is, I don't know if he's going to come in and score 60 points or 90 points. What kind of year is he going to have? But he can play with anybody, and he can set the plays up to anybody. He plays at a good speed. He's not super big, so he's not like, he's kind of predictable on what he's going to do on the ice. Whereas McDavid, like, you just never know what's going to happen. You have to be ready for that. So Taylor Hall playing alongside Connor Bedard is going to be really interesting, because Bedard is a shooter, but also has fantastic vision, and can do whatever he wants on the ice with his stick in his hands. So who knows how many, like, it's not even certain that they're going to play with each other, but Taylor Hall can really benefit from playing with a guy like him if they mesh well together, like you said.
That's why I think it's just so hit or miss. It's if this happens, maybe that'll happen, because we don't have anything to really base it off of, because they've never played together, and they both never played in Chicago. So we don't really know what that's going to look like when they get fit into that system. So it's a big factor for me. I'm not saying don't pick Taylor Hall. I'm saying do pick him, but I'm saying don't pick him higher just because he might play with Bedard. If
Exactly.
you're already into like preseason and you have one of those late drafts and you're like, oh, he's playing with Bedard all preseason. They've played every single game together and they've put up 10 goals collectively in 3 games. Then you might want to be, a little bit more excited about something like that. But as of right now, if your drafts are going on, don't overvalue Hall just because he might play with somebody like Bedard. That's kind of my cautionary advice when it comes to him. All right. Last category. I don't really have any avoid players when it comes to left wingers because there's just way too many good ones. You can just fill out your lineup card all the way down to third liners at this point, just because everybody's so good.
Yeah.
So instead, I kind of switched it and I went for one player I think is going to have a big downswing year and another one I think is going to have a big upswing year. Do you have anybody that comes to mind when it comes to those two, or do you want to steal mine and we can just talk about those?
You go first. Let me think on this while you talk.
Sure. I'll start with my downswing, and I think it's going to be Brad Marchand. And it hurts me to say because to me, Marchand has been one of the best fantasy assets for any fantasy owner over the past, 10 plus years even, just because he's been so good and he fills so many different categories. But I think with the slight downswing of Boston, they're not going to replicate last year. There's no way in this. No, never. They're not going to do what they did last year again. So yeah. I don't think he's going to have some just ridiculous 90-point year. I think he's going to be sitting closer to that, 70-point and on the low end, maybe 65-point year. Still getting some hits, still getting some blocks and doing those kind of other things that he does. But I think it's enough of a downswing that Marchand is no longer that top 30 fantasy pick that he would have been for the past bunch of years. And I think it's significant enough that you should be looking at him closer to your, 7th, 8th, maybe even 9th rounds, as opposed to maybe your 3rd, 4th rounds.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, that might be a bit of a hot take, but I agree. So, yeah, and I don't know if you saw, but ESPN put up their predictions for points. Did you see this?
Do they have one for him? No,
yeah,
I didn't see those yet.
What do you think their point prediction or point projection is for Marchand?
Marchand, if you're saying it, it's probably either stupid high or stupid low. So if it's NHL.com, I'll guess stupid high and put like 92.
Low. It's stupid low.
45 points.
46.
Okay, no, absolutely no. He's not going to be that low.
Yeah.
I do think he's going to be low, but I don't think he's going to be that low. I think he's still a good player, especially if he has any ice time with Pastrnak. He's going to get assists by accident.
Yeah.
So and I don't think 46 is realistic.
Yeah, no. And derailing a little bit, they went from 46 for Marchand to 56 with Slavkovsky.
Who wrote this? we need to bring him on and have a discussion. I want to know how they came up with that projection because I wholeheartedly disagree with both.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. So for somebody on the downswing that I'm gonna go with, I don't know. I'm trying to think. I might go with Nick Paul, which breaks my heart because I love him. He's one of my favorite players in the league. He scored almost 20 goals last year, 30 points, 32 points, and 17 goals, I believe. I don't think he's going to replicate that. He got a really good opportunity in Tampa Bay. But if he's back down to the bottom 6 and plays the full year down there, then I think he's back down to the kind of 15 to 20 point range. And it's not a huge downswing. Like nobody's drafting him for his points and his high caliber play, but I do think that a lot of people might be thinking of drafting Nick Paul this year after the year he had in Tampa Bay, and it was good. But I do think that he's going to take that step back again.
Okay. I don't really have any counterpoints to that. I think you're right. He's not really that 20 to 25 goal scorer unless he's maybe in a top 6 spot. But if he's sitting in that, 3rd, 4th line role, then 15 goals, maybe 30 points is kind of where he's at. But you're right. You're not drafting him for his point scoring. You're drafting him for those other categories. He's going to get you some bonus points in. So downswing, yes, but not, ridiculous that you shouldn't pick him up in your league.
Yeah.
Rounds. High end for me, big upswing player. This might be a bit obvious, but I think it's Jonathan Huberdeau.
Yeah.
I don't think he's going to be sitting down in that sub 60 point mark again. I don't think he's going to be down in the dumps like it seemed like he was under Sutter. I think the new coach is going to work wonders for him, just having that different voice in the room. I don't know if he's going to be up in that 100-point range again, but I would say point a game would be a lot more realistic for Huberdeau this year, that he's worth taking maybe as high as your like 6th or 7th round if you're feeling really, really high on him. But he's always been a fantastic offensive, just dynamic player. He's always been a great fantasy option. So if you're in a keeper league and you're like, oh, maybe I should keep him, maybe I should drop him, I would lean towards the keep as opposed to the drop, and just have a little faith that he's going to be back to being the player. And the last year was just kind of the outlier.
Yeah, well, the coaching change is a big thing. I saw a tweet from somebody online, and again, I really wish I could remember who it was. But they tweeted out and said that Anze Kopitar, after Daryl Sutter left LA, he had a gigantic leap in points. It was like a 40-point difference. And while it might not be the exact same with Huberdeau, it very likely will be. It's a coach coming in, his first NHL head coach job. He's probably going to give his star players a little bit of freedom to kind of find their game, especially with Huberdeau. He really needs to find that game to get that value that they traded Matthew Tkachuk for. But yeah, no, I completely agree with that. That's the super obvious pick.
Got anyone that stands out other than Huberdeau to you?
I'm going to go with one kind of under the radar a little bit. I'm going to go with Mason Marchment. Sure. He had a bit of a down year last year. He only scored 12 goals last year. He had 18 the year before. And I think that he can get back up to that kind of 20 goal, 50 point area, opposed to the 31 points he had last year, I think. So not a game breaker on your lineup, but Mason Marchment is somebody that I think is going to have a bounce back year. Now that Dallas lost a few of their forwards, they did get a couple back in like Duchesne and stuff, but I do think that Marchment is going to kind of take the opportunity that he's been there a little bit now. He's got his feet wet in Dallas, and I think he's going to have a big year.
He's also a decent physical player too, so you can take that into consideration when you grab somebody like Marchment. I always liked him. I really liked him when he played in Florida. It was a bit of a disappointment when he was in Dallas, but you're right. Maybe now that he's got his feet wet and he's got his legs under him, that he'll have that confidence to really step up and be that same type of player he was in Florida. Be a little bit more of that power forward, contributing, scoring player like he showed that he could be. I like it. Anybody else that's glaring that we didn't talk about that you want to throw in?
There's hundreds of players that we could talk about. We could go on for hours and hours, but there's nobody really standing out to me that I really want to throw in here. How about you?
No. Like I said, if we just went down a whole list, we'd be here for the next 5 hours. So we're not going to do that. But if anybody has any other ones that they want to ask us about, always feel free to ask us in the comments or tweet at us about it. We'll be happy to engage with you guys over that. So that's going to wrap it up. Thank you again, everybody, for tuning into this week's episode of Fantasy Forecheck. Next show, we're going to be talking about the big kahunas, the centers. Everybody likes to talk about centers. I know I like to talk about centers. It's going to be a lot of fun. Lot. So it might be a little bit longer than usual, but still, we're going to try and keep it consistent and good for everybody. I'm going to have a lot of fun doing it. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on your preferred listening channel and to the Hockey Writers podcast and YouTube pages, where you can find everything and anything else hockey related. You're also welcome to follow me on Twitter at Stro67.
And mine is at Jacob Billington.
And feel free to drop us a like, and we will keep you up to date on all things fantasy throughout the year. Thanks again, everybody, for watching. We will see you next time.